A 16-year-old girl who lived in the same house as her parents and younger sisters had gone to sleep in her room, and in the morning she was found dead. The police immediately realised they were dealing with a murder, but none of her relatives heard anything that night. It took 31 years to finally solve the case, but no one was prepared for this turn of events. Fawn Cox was born March 24, 1973 in Kansas City, Missouri. Her appearance soon followed that of two more daughters. The family lived in a small two-storey house located in a rough residential neighbourhood. From an early age, she helped her parents take care of the younger children, went to church regularly and enjoyed swimming. When she turned 16, Fawn got a part-time job at a local amusement park. Her family lived quite poorly, and the girl sought to earn at least some money in her spare time from school. She spent most of the summer vacations of 1989 at work. Mostly the girls stood behind the cash register and sold tickets to amusement rides. On Wednesday, July 26th, she finished her shift at about 10 p.m. Her mother and younger sister picked her up in the car, as it would have taken a long time to get from the park to her home on public transportation. Almost immediately after returning home, Fawn went to bed since she had to go to work again. The next morning, the girl slept on the second floor. She had her own room. Her sisters usually slept in the next room, but that night she was alone on the floor. Her sister Amber, who was only a year younger, was babysitting for a familiar family that night. The other sister, Felicia, decided to sleep on the first floor because it was much cooler there. It was a very hot night and the only air conditioner working was downstairs. Their parents also slept on the first floor. The next morning at about 9 o'clock, the whole family woke up to the sound of the alarm clock in Fawn's room, but the girl wouldn't turn it off for some reason. Then her younger sister and mother went up to her room where a horrible sight awaited them. Fawn lay on the bed with no sign of life. Her neck was visibly bruised. The girl also had no pulse, and her parents immediately called an ambulance, but they were no longer able to help her. It was apparent that Fawn had passed away hours before. After examining her body, medical experts determined that strangulation was the cause of death and the girl had also been abused. From the first hours, the police realised they had a very difficult investigation ahead of them. Despite the fact that Fawn was killed right in her room in a small house with very poor soundproofing, her parents and sister heard absolutely nothing. However, there was an explanation. The air conditioner on the first floor was old and very loud, blocking out any other noise in the house. The only strange thing that night was noticed by Fawn's sister. Their poodle was behaving anxiously and barking, but they did not pay much attention to it. This behaviour was attributed to the fact that the dog was pregnant. After examining the scene, the police made several important discoveries. Their theory was that the attacker or group had entered the house through a second-storey window overlooking the backyard. There was an old trailer parked near the house that could easily be used to climb up to the canopy of the outbuilding, which was almost level with the window. The window itself had been left open because there was no air conditioning on the second floor and one had to fight the heat somehow. In Fawn's room, the experts found the first important clues. A few short hairs, small bloodstains, and traces of semen on the sheet from her bed. All of this was sent to the lab for analysis. In addition, several items were missing from the house, including radios, a Nintendo game console, and a stereo recorder. As several other items were found on the ground in front of the house, it looked as if the burglar had thrown them out the window to take them with him, but left them there for some reason. Detectives also found that various items had been removed from a closet in an adjoining room on the second floor. They believed the perpetrator was hiding in that closet while waiting for everyone in the house to go to sleep. Normally, Fawn's sister slept in that room, but not that night. For this reason, no one noticed the items on display. The police discovered another strange clue. An old army cap was found in Fawn's room. All her relatives said they'd never seen the girl wearing it, so detectives assumed the killer might have forgotten the cap at the scene. Despite the impressive array of evidence, police were unable to quickly identify the suspects. The problem is that in 1989, DNA forensics was rather underdeveloped and there were no common genetic databases at that time. Detective Benjamin Caldwell, who handled the case, put forward the main version of what happened in his opinion. There could have been several assailants and they must have known the house well. Not only did they know how to get to the second floor through the backyard in total darkness, but they must also have known the layout of the rooms. The next step for the police was to look for witnesses. They interviewed neighbours, friends and relatives of Fawn, but all were inconclusive. The detectives had one weighty problem before them. The neighbourhood in which the house was located was very poor and criminal. Various criminal gangs operated there, and their participants were quite difficult to bring to justice. A month after Fawn's murder, the case finally got off the ground. The police had a witness who pointed them to 3 suspects. This witness knew a number of important details that the police never divulged, so his story was taken seriously. The suspects were 3 teenagers, one of whom was in the same class as Fawn. They were arrested and questioned, but the boys denied any involvement in the murder. During a search of one of their homes, police found items stolen from the victim's room. This was enough to charge all 3 of them with murder. But even here, the detectives were disappointed. First, the witness suddenly recanted and stopped cooperating with the police. Second, DNA analysis of blood, hair and semen found at the crime scene did not show an unambiguous match with the suspect's samples. In those years, experts could not yet establish an exact match of the samples, and all of their tests showed questionable results. In other words, the analysis could not confirm either a full match or a guaranteed mismatch. Despite this, the police were able to obtain useful information from one of the detainees. During one of the interrogations, he confessed that he had indeed broken into Fawn's house that night in the company of other boys and stolen some things. He recounted how he made his way to the 2nd floor, through the canopy of the canopy, and even revealed unknown details. According to him, when he threw a tape recorder out the window, its handle fell off. A boy hid under a nearby bush, and the police did find the item in that very spot. Except that the young man quickly retracted his statement and no longer cooperated with the investigation, which would have prevented his confession from being used in court. Because of this, the police had to let the men go and the investigation was at a standstill again. Most likely the witnesses were simply intimidated. But without their testimony in court, the case had almost no chance. All we know is that one of them spent 8 months in jail for stealing items from Fawn's house. The case has since gone into a long drawer. The police didn't reopen the investigation until the early 2000s, and the first thing they did was upload DNA samples from the crime scene to the CODIS database. It had been created several years before and contained DNA samples from people tried for serious crimes. Unfortunately, no matches were found for the Fawn killer. The emergence of this database was the result of major scientific advances in the study of DNA. It also allowed police to recollect DNA samples from the 3 original suspects and conduct more advanced tests. This time, experts unequivocally determined that the hair, semen and blood did not belong to any of them. This was rather odd given the fact that the suspects were found in possession of Fawn's belongings. Detectives speculated that the 3 guys had indeed robbed her house at night, but there was another man with them. He was the one who had abused and killed the girl. All of this raised even more questions. Could it be that 4 criminals entered the house unnoticed, killed Fawn, and just as unnoticed left the scene of the crime? The police still had no answer to this question. Since then, the case has once again stalled. With each passing year, the Fawn family believed less and less that the murder would ever be solved. They continued to believe that those 3 suspects had been in their house that night and could point to the killer but would never do so. The only thing that could help them learn the truth was a DNA sample stored in the police lab. In 2018, something interesting happened. Amber, Fawn's younger sister, revealed some disturbing details about the crime that she had put into facts unknown to the police on a popular American forum for unsolved crimes. Over the 20 years of its existence, the forum had gained a very reliable reputation, and its participants have helped the police solve several high-profile cases. Amber has been verified and confirmed that she really is who she says she is, so her post is worthy of attention. She herself worked as a nanny from Monday to Friday and was only at home during the day on weekends. The girl slept in the very room on the 2nd floor through which the burglars had snuck in. Accordingly, the criminals would have been immediately spotted. In addition, they would have watched the house and waited until Fawn's mother and her younger sister went to pick up the girl from work. Despite all this, Amber's story didn't bring the case any closer to solving it, but it was already 2018 and the science of DNA research had come a long way. Dozens, if not hundreds of long-forgotten cases were being solved thanks to new analysis tools. Fawn's relatives saw it all and resented why the police were in no hurry to reopen the murder investigation. They kept talking to detectives about the case, and each time they got the same answer. Extended DNA testing requires money and the police have dozens of cases waiting for funding. But the relatives decided to take the initiative and launched a fundraiser. In 2019, the family wanted to cover the full cost of the DNA samples and also offered a $10,000 reward for any information that would lead to the perpetrator's capture. Due to the extensive media coverage of the case and numerous interviews given by the family, many people who cared responded to requests for help. The family quickly collected the necessary amount of money, but even here they were disappointed. The police department refused to initiate this investigation at the expense of the relatives of the victim. The lead detective explained that there was bound to be a big problem in such a situation. If the relatives of one victim could pay for such tests and expedite the results, and hundreds of other families who have been searching for years for the murder of their loved ones should have the same right. But it is simply impossible to implement such a thing in practice, since only a few laboratories in the world conduct innovative DNA tests, and with such a simultaneous influx of those wishing to do so, their resources are simply not enough. The leading company in this field is Parabon Nanolabs, which we have already repeatedly mentioned in other stories. They have made tremendous progress in the study of DNA, from finding a person's relatives from the smallest genetic samples to creating an approximate portrait of the owner of the DNA. It was this lab that was to take over the study of the samples left in Fawn's bedroom the night she was murdered. The girl's relatives believed that the police were in no hurry to pursue their case for another reason. They were a poor family from a bad neighbourhood, and murder was not a priority for investigators there. In an interview, Fawn's sister said that if it had been a murderer of a family of rich or high-ranking people, all the necessary investigations would have been done instantly. Unfortunately, they never managed to expedite the process, and it wasn't until late 2020 that the long-awaited breakthrough happened. But the family wasn't ready for that kind of truth. With funding from the FBI, the police did send samples from Fawn's room to a lab there. They began a detailed examination of DNA and a search for possible relatives of its possessor. It was the semen sample found at the murder scene that they mostly worked with. In November 2020, they were finally able to find the person to whom that DNA belonged. It turned out to be Fawn's cousin, Donald Cox. Of course, such news shocked the whole family. At the time of Fawn's death, Donald was 21 years old and no one had even considered his possible involvement. That said, Donald was a pretty troubled man and was constantly behind bars. He was tried for misdemeanours such as theft and possession of illegal substances. Unfortunately, in those years, they did not yet take a DNA sample from such criminals, otherwise this case would have been solved much earlier. Donald died of an overdose in 2006, but the police investigated his death because certain circumstances seemed suspicious to them. It was because of that investigation that a sample of his DNA was preserved, but it was not entered into the FBI database because the man in that case was a victim, not a perpetrator. Once the experts informed the police of their discovery, they matched the sample with the semen found at the murder scene and got a 100 match. Despite the gravity of this discovery, the relatives have received an answer to a question that has plagued them for 31 years, but there remained one very important point in the whole story. The great deal of evidence indicated that the three original suspects had also been in the Fawn house that night. It was now becoming clear how the perpetrators knew the house and the family's routine so precisely. Donald was a frequent visitor and knew all these nuances. However, the police closed the case and no new charges were filed against the three men. Fawn's sister said she saw no point in trying to get a confession out of them. Even though the men had been present in the house at night, they may not have even witnessed the murder itself. Donald may well have stayed in the house alone, only then attacked Fawn. Felicia added that the three suspects had already paid for their act throughout this time. While the case remained unsolved, the entire neighbourhood was 100% certain of their guilt because of this. They were treated very negatively, with all the consequences that would follow. According to Sister Fawn, their lives were effectively ruined. In addition, after the case was closed, it turned out that the police had originally learned about the suspects from the family of one of them. Relatives noticed a Nintendo set-top box among his belongings and remembered that this was the one that had been stolen from Fawn's house. It was on the news and everyone in the neighbourhood already knew the details. In any case, it is simply impossible to prove their guilt, and the relatives of the victim finally know the name of the killer. He lived for 17 years without any punishment for what he had done. In all that time, as if nothing had happened, he communicated with his family, but eventually his addiction to illegal substances drove him to his grave, and he was no longer a threat to anyone. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like the video if you like it. Thanks for watching.